Either you help us now, he said, or your help will come too late. Well, listening to that with me was our foreign affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. And Doug, reading between the lines of what Dmytro Kuleba had to say, do you think he got a little of what he wanted from NATO today?
He keeps getting in little bits and chunks and pieces, as he said, what he wants, what Ukraine wants. But it has been a very heavy lift. It is a constant effort to persuade, to cajole time and again. And as he said, each time the West set a limit on either weapons or sanctions, said, okay, but this is where we draw the line. It's taken a very forceful persuasion campaign on the part of the Ukrainians to convince the West this just isn't enough. We need a little bit more. If it's light weapons, we need heavier. If it's heavier, we need heavier. We need defensive. We also need offensive. Each time he says he's been able to break that wall of resistance in the West, but you don't get the impression listening to him. It's a really, really difficult tightrope act that he's doing here, because on the one hand, the Ukrainians are genuinely grateful for the help and the support and the solidarity that the Western allies have provided. That he's not feigning it when he says, I am grateful to the West and to our European friends for what they've done so far. But he's seeing this narrative of, what the West is doing to help Ukraine from a real different perspective. Whereas here, the narrative has been about the great solidarity and coming together of NATO and imposing severe sanctions, the likes of which Russia has never seen on Russia, and NATO and a rebirth, almost a renaissance of unity, of purpose and cause and determination. Ukraine's perspective, no. There are a lot of cracks in the Western edifice. It takes a lot to keep the Western determination to help Ukraine up and to keep it sort of feeding it and ensuring that they get the weapons they need. So yeah, I get that balancing act between expressing gratitude, genuine, heartfelt gratitude to the West for what they've done so far, but also very bluntly and sometimes really calling them out. And Volodymyr Zelensky's even done this perhaps even more forcefully, really calling out, almost chiding the West. Yes, we're thankful, but it's not enough. This is what we need. We need more. Trust us when we tell you we need more. At every step of the way, when we have told you we need more, you have ended up, after a lot of persuasion, agreeing with us. The cost, as he said, though, is how long is it going to take? He said, how many buchas have to take place for you to impose sanctions? And he's talking about whole hog, full-fledged sanctions on the full Russian energy industry. Because so far, we see the sanctions have not been enough. Yeah, sure, they've inflicted some pain on Russia, but they have not been enough, as he was very clear, the foreign minister, in saying, to thwart Russia's war machine. He says right now that war in Donbass, Nadia, is just getting underway. There is worse yet to come. And he said, tragically, unfortunately, I have to tell you, some of it is going to remind you of World War II. So a grateful foreign minister, but one who's telling the West basically, once again, I have to tell you bluntly, it's not enough.
And while the focus today from him was on weaponry, there was questions as well about whether or not he's willing to talk to the Russians to try and find a way out of this war. He was pretty explicit. He said, actually, it is the only way to end this. And he said he would be willing to meet with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. What did you make of that?
I made of that. He's pulling out all stops to show that, the Russians want to portray the Ukrainians as perhaps the negotiator breakers, the deal breakers. He wants to make it very clear at every level of the Ukrainian leadership, we are ready and willing to talk. At the same time, he's made it very clear that not just the ideological, but the entire moral framework within which the Ukrainian delegation, and in his view, and the Russian delegation approach these talks are literally night and day. He said that Sergei Lavrov, he has met him. He says he doesn't have any particular feelings one way or another for the man. He's suggesting he perhaps thinks he's at least a professional that he could do business with. But I don't think he has any illusions about Sergei Lavrov. He said very explicitly, remember, Sergei Lavrov is a man, yes, albeit a very polished foreign minister who's been with Putin for 22 years, knows his briefs inside out, better perhaps as well as any foreign minister in the world. But let's not be deluded. He is a product of the Putinian system of government. It's, to use the phrase I keep using, he didn't use it, I'll use it, is they all drank the Kool-Aid, meaning that they are all hostage to a sort of world vision, a global vision, which is sort of forged in the virulent propaganda that we see the state media, Russian state media, churning out day after day, which is a product of Putin's own grievance-filled, angry imagination of a world against Russia, a world trying to bring Russia down, a vendetta against the West, going back to Ukraine paying the price for the West humiliating Russia at the end of the Cold War. That's what the narrative goes back to, and that's in sort of a way what he's saying. All of these people in Putin's government are sort of products of that worldview, of that way of thinking. Whenever you go to a negotiating table with them, no matter how earnest and professional you are and good your intentions are, you're only going to get so far if one side is not negotiating in good faith, but he's willing to go to that table.
And in terms of the response, weaponry, of course, something that Dmytro Kuleba really wants more of from NATO.
Needs more of,
he would say as well. But also diplomatically, we're talking about sanctions. But later on this afternoon, we're going to cross live to the United Nations in New York, because there is this move underway there to kick Russia out of the UN Human Rights Council.
Yeah.
What's your sense as to how significant that might be were it to go ahead?
Well, Russia wields enormous clout at the UN, in the UN system, as we know, also in the UN Security Council, which is a separate body. It's one of the 5 veto-wielding members. And it sees the Human Rights Council as yet another body in which it wants to be able to have the same sort of influential role. Now, my sense here is that right now it is to use the words of the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, what she said is Russia's participation on a UN, the most prominent human rights forum in the world body, the UN Human Rights Council, Russia's participation is a farce. Its participation is taking place amidst a backdrop, and this is only the most recent one, she said, of atrocities being committed across Ukraine by its troops, atrocities which Russia is in blanket denial about, to the point of their state media claiming that's all a film set, that it was all staged in a provocation by Ukrainian Nazis. So it's a farce. Its participation is a farce. Russia's pushing back and saying this is yet again another plot by the West to try to ensure that the West is able to dominate and have total control over the world. Not my words. Those are actually Russia's words in letters that it has sent out to a lot of countries, smaller countries, mostly in Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Caribbean, sort of warning them of the consequences of not voting with it in that upcoming vote today. Basically saying if you vote against us, that will have a negative impact, to say the least. We'll see that as an unfriendly act in our future bilateral relations. So Russia sees this as a conspiracy against it. It sees that it has done no wrongdoing on the human rights level whatsoever, and he sees it as yet another bid by the West to impose and dictate its will.
Well, we'll see what happens when the UN General Assembly meets on that issue later on today. For now, though, Doug, thanks very much indeed.